Imagine that you open a social media post or news story about poverty in a new region called Teslandia. What do you expect to see? It might mention the GDP, crime rates, or life expectancy, but what do they really say about the people that live there, though? At the national and global stage, it's common to overgeneralize immeasurably complex issue of poverty with statistics and concepts like the poverty line. Most mainstream poverty models that use single threshold metrics fail to capture the underlying mechanisms of human struggle among diverse populations and situations. So, how should we try to measure poverty? If we truly want to come close to addressing poverty, we must take an approach that focuses on understanding the actual state of the people's well-being and living standards. We must measure poverty as a lack of capabilities instead of a lack of resources, treat poverty as a continuum of deprivations, and take a context-sensitive approach.
So, how do you define poverty? Our proposed definition is that poverty is a measurement of the average lack of sustainable central capabilities that are necessary to maintain basic human dignity for an entire lifespan. This definition incorporates the capabilities approach to measuring poverty and inequality. But what is the capability approach, and why should we use it for defining and measuring poverty? To answer that question, we need to pay a visit to the minds of two revolutionary theorists, Shen and Nussbaum. Economist Amartya Sen won the Nobel Prize for his theoretical work on poverty measurement. In his interview with Open University, he says that to do or be something requires certain freedoms, and that capabilities are the combinations of those beings and doings that one has the freedom for. A simple investigation of one's resources and achievement would fail to sufficiently capture the big picture. Someone who is chronically isolated or unsafe in their current living situation does not have sufficient dignity to continue in that state. By looking at an individual's capabilities as a framework for well-being, we can understand how different qualities of human life connect to develop an overall value of human life. Yet this approach is quite difficult to put into operation. Stan himself refuses to create a universally applicable model to avoid any implication of authority over entire populations and governments. Nussbaum, on the other hand, presents her well-established predetermined 10 central human capabilities applicable to every part of the globe. She argues the need for each of those capabilities to preserve the dignity of every human being. Of course, one of the biggest criticisms on her central list of capabilities is that it's culturally imperialist and not applicable everywhere to the same degree across the globe. Nevertheless, this list could serves as a model for selecting foundational capabilities, which provides us with more of an operative framework than Shen.
In our framework, we attempt to incorporate both scholars' concerns by proposing a central list of capabilities that we emphasize on being evaluated with context-specific metrics. Inspired by Nussbaum's list, we developed our own list of 8 capabilities that we believe are fundamental to assessing poverty. First off, life health. Examples of metrics could be child maternal mortality rates and access to emergency health care. Originally, Nussbaum had life and health as separate capabilities, but we argue that for a prolonged life, you need proper nutrition and access to proper health care, which are included under the health domain. Next, we have physical autonomy or safety. Examples are crime rates or general population surveys on people's perception of their safety. Third, self-expression or education. Some ways to measure are literacy rates, school dropout rates, and even access to additional academic resources. Fourth, political or social access. Looking at voting rights, freedom of speech, representation of certain demographics in political spheres, and even populations of elderly people in nursing homes. Fifth, effects of or resilience to adversities. People in poverty are often the worst affected during disaster strikes, communal riots and violence, nationwide lockdown, war, etc. We added this to our list of capabilities because we believe the damage caused from such adversities can have long-term impacts and disproportionately affect poverty-stricken communities. Sixth, self-actualization and ideals. Anything that can capture freedom to realize one's potential and values, for example, career and learning opportunities, free time. Seventh, material freedoms. Here we include anything that can be measured with a monetary amount, finances, appliances, and consumable resources. Last, self-dignity or emotional intelligence. Stable emotional development, ability to connect with others, and maintain a sense of self-worth.
One may argue that incorporating more abstract concepts such as self-actualization and ideals rather complicates assessing and measuring poverty. Almost every poverty measure from the MPI to the OPM avoids incorporating abstract concepts of human capability because of the notion that it would be too hard to measure. Furthermore, abstract capabilities can be hard to justify. We don't consider someone's lack of self-actualization or emotional intelligence. Doesn't poverty just mean destitution? When research fellow Robert Rector wrote his Understanding Poverty in the United States, he narrowed the idea of poverty to basic dollar value. He argues that the American poor are not impoverished when compared to the rest of the world due to their relative assets and food security. Yet he dismisses any effort to measure inequality within our own country. We must consider more abstract capabilities to highlight how poverty and inequality are intertwined. These capabilities are possible to measure if we include qualitative data. Just like the MPI, we can conduct individual surveys and tests to assess whether an individual or living unit could achieve certain functionings, also known as their actual beings and doings.
Considering that poverty is a multidimensional issue, we must also understand that there is no poverty line. We need to differentiate between the household earner who is living paycheck to paycheck and the plantation farmer who cannot afford enough food to survive. The multidimensional poverty index and extreme poverty measure models do address this issue from two different approaches. The MPI model, created by the UNDP, assesses the combination of health, education, and material resource access that someone may lack. In contrast, the EPM model instead looks at multiple levels of material resource use to see how far under the poverty line someone may be. We propose combining both a multidimensional and multi-leveled approach to treat poverty as a continuum of conditions. Going back to Teslandia, we can create a sort of poverty distribution map. At the smallest unit of measurement, communities will have the authority to decide how they will measure the central capabilities and then create a mean capability index from 1 to 8. This index would represent the average sufficiency of our 8 capabilities. The region's MCI would represent the population average of those indexes. From there, we can subdivide Teslandia and see the distribution of those indexes. As we further subdivide our distribution map, we can compare the inequality of capabilities between each region. This allows us to get some insight into which regions are more severely impoverished. At this point, someone might ask, does this mean that we're giving each capability equal weighting? Yes. We may generally believe that health is more important than ideals or safety is more important than socialization, but providing any arbitrary weighting between these capabilities would be subjective. Certain capabilities such as social access and emotional intelligence combine to allow for certain functionings. We must equally consider these central capabilities to highlight their interdependence or the tragic conflict that arises if there is a dilemma between choosing one critical capability by neglecting the other.
For the last piece of our framework, our emphasis on context sensitivity in measuring poverty is what sets our proposal apart from other approaches to measuring poverty. If we want to truly make a global evaluation of poverty, our approach must be flexible enough to account for regional and situational differences in daily life for different individuals. Without addressing cultural differences, we run the risk of placing our doctrine and values over other parts of the world. For example, any collectivist culture will prioritize conformity and have different definitions of freedoms compared to individualistic societies such as the US. We must also consider how other countries may not use the same technology and infrastructures, even if they still have the same basic capabilities for human dignity. Humans are highly adaptable, and one community may have different methods of achieving the same capability as another, although this difference may incur certain insecurities of capabilities. A model should be able to account for a family living paycheck to paycheck or a country facing political instability. This sounds like a lot of complications and not a lot of solutions. Well, here's one solution. Let's give each region its own model. This doesn't necessarily mean that we entrust the government with making a model, but we should rely on experts, ideally those native to the region, who would plan and conduct poverty studies by using our list framework. In addition to applying the strategies that we already mentioned, we would weight each capability metric by the stability of that capability to account for external insecurities. And we would also take a bottom-up approach to measuring capabilities. What do I mean by a bottom-up approach? Well, let's go look at the pyramid. Ideally, we would want every metric to be evaluated at an individual level, but we must retain content sensitivity. We can measure access to basic health care or civil liberties at an individual level, but certain institutions such as public schools would provide blanket capabilities for entire communities. This pyramid is an additional parameter in a context-specific poverty model. The individual level describes highly independent capabilities, whereas the living unit and sub-regional levels allow us to make some more generalizations. Although there will be some assumptions that we'd have to take when you get higher levels of evaluation, this allows us to, again, look at the big picture of poverty.
Does this mean that we would let our model of poverty accommodate human rights violations or underdevelopment? Why shouldn't we apply a US-centric idea of freedoms and modernization when measuring poverty in other countries? The truth is that there are overwhelmingly popular sentiments against the US-centric concept of progress. Nussbaum points out one such difference when it comes to freedom of speech in Germany. Speech is constitutionally protected except for using it in a way that could cause imminent danger for others. Yet Germany also prohibits hate speech, especially anti-Semitic speech. Given the high awareness of ethno-religious atrocities during the Holocaust, the consensus among the German people is that they will not tolerate such hate speech to protect the dignity of others. For similar reasons, we don't want to impose something as subjective as modernization into a poverty metric. Certain technologies that we rely on are not absolute needs in other regions. If they still retain basic capabilities that allow for basic human dignity, then there is no need to introduce new technologies to improve their quality of life. Once we create a continuum-based capabilities model that considers a diversity of situational and regional differences, who would not be impoverished? Well, with our model, almost no one. Our definition of poverty is designed to recognize at least some deprivation of capabilities in nearly every individual. What our model really shows is the inequality between individuals. At Washington and Lee, the Shepherd Program's mission is to understand and address the causes and consequences of poverty and inequality in ways that respect the dignity of every person. We must recognize that most people do not have that basic dignity yet. Nonetheless, if we continue to make progress to this mission, we can narrow that poverty gap and still improve life for everyone.